welcome to another edition of Dream Up, coming to you from KABF 88.3 FM in Little Rock, nationally syndicated and internationally streamed. It's the show where a reporter, a comic, and a lawyer walked into a bar and came out with a great hour of talk about how they each achieved their dreams in their distinct walks of life, complete with interviews each week with celebrities, experts, and average Joes and Janes who've achieved their dreams and are here to talk about the obstacles they overcame to reach them. Today, our very special guest is a man who is a two-time Republican candidate for president and the former governor of Arkansas, as well as the host of the fantastic long-running talk show, Huckabee, Mike Huckabee.
Yeah. Happy to have him.
Yes, what Arkansas legend right there, hitting it up, man. This is great. So glad he's coming to our show today. So glad. And I was on his show as a guest a year and a half ago. So it's great to be able to interview him now. So love it, man.
Yeah, well, I'm one of your hosts, Carl Double Portion Kozlowski, because I'm supersized and I want a double portion of blessings from the Lord. And with me from Hollywood is
Ron. I tell jokes for a living, Pearson. And yep, I'm the comic in the story about the journalist. That's you, Carl. The comedian, that's me. And the lawyer, unfortunately, that's Antonio. And he's coming to us from where?
I'm in Los Angeles today, and I'm Antonio Fun-Size Delgado, coming to you from Los Angeles.
The fun side. Antonio, you were actually going to come to my house and we were going to shoot it together. And I got the booster seat ready right over here for you so that you'd actually seem the same height as me, Mr. Fun Size.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Don't forget the sippy cup for me.
Yeah. And no, Carl, for you, double portion, a Fun Size is a whole different game.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
No,
I went to McDonald's, so of course, the only option was the big breakfast. So, hey.
You know, I'm so grateful for our guest today. You know, he was in his family, he was the first male to graduate from high school. And I can relate to that so much because I am also the first in my family to graduate from high school. You know, I'm an immigrant from El Salvador. I came to the United States because of the Civil War in El Salvador. You know, I have so many crazy stories. I mean, one day I remember soldiers came to our block and they blocked off the roads at both ends, and they were taking young boys to fight in the Civil War during.
So they were conscripting soldiers.
There was conscripting soldiers, and just by luck, you know, I remember hiding under my bed. My mom telling me to hide under my bed, but I don't know if the truck was just too full already. But they stopped right before coming to our house. Wow. And I am just so grateful that my family brought me here, and that I'm now a lawyer, and that I was able to live this dream. And I can't wait to talk about this kind of things with our guest today, because I want to talk about what it means to be an American, and why it is that so many of us are so proud and so grateful that we have people who are willing to jump in the ring and willing to make this country better and stay better.
That's beautiful, Antonio. And you say that in a beautiful setting with police sirens in the background.
I'm in Los Angeles. Back to the war zone again.
Still safer than El Salvador.
Not by much. But you actually have a connection to Mike as well, that I think people would find interesting.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I didn't get to finish. And yeah, Ron was on his show, and I ran for office this last election cycle.
Which office did you run for? I
ran for Congress in the 40th district.
The U.S. Congress. So a guy that's the first to graduate from his high school in his whole family history, who comes from El Salvador, you were running for U.S. Congress in Washington, D.C.
That's correct. That's correct, Ron.
That's amazing.
Yep, and we had a lot of support, a lot of grassroots support. We a lot of small donations from regular folks, but you know, we're grateful to have Mike Huckabee, because he was one of our donors as well. And we want to thank him. We really do.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Shoot, guys. Let's move on to our quote of the day. I love this one. It's and I did it because it's New Year's, right? Everybody makes these New Year's resolutions.
Yes.
So everybody sets their goals. And I thought, man, this is the biggest goal setting time of the year. And by the way, I set my goal at midnight on New Year's Eve and broke it by 12:02. So, but here it is, the quote. I don't focus on what I'm up against. I focus on my goals and I ignore the rest. I love that. Let me say it one more time. I don't focus on what I'm up against. I focus on my goals and I ignore the rest. It's such a powerful quote because it means that nothing's getting in your way. Who do you guys think came up with that one?
Boy.
I'm clueless this time, Ron. Was it Carl?
I don't know. It sounds sort of like
Carl's goal is a plate of food and nothing's getting in his way.
Yeah, that's what sounds like Carl. I think I've heard him say that.
What I'm up against, I focus on my goal and I ignore the rest.
Yeah, I've heard Carl say that before.
It sounds like that could rhyme, so it could be an intelligent rapper. I'm going to say Kanye West.
Ooh, I like that. That's interesting. It's actually Venus Williams. Talk about someone who's overcome a lot and become somebody just truly great at what they do. And I love it because if she just focuses on tennis and forgets the rest, it leads to greatness. So I think attention to detail and focusing on things really get you to your way. And since it is the new year, people talk about writing your goals down. So there was an old study from Harvard, and some people have tried to debunk the study, but the study, so I'm just throwing that out there. People have tried to debunk it. But the study said that they took 1979 Harvard grads, and 84% of them had no goals. 13% of them had goals and not written down, and the other had clear written down goals. So 10 years later, they go back, 1989. The 13% who had goals but not written down made double what the people with no goals had.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
And then the study said that 3% who had clear written down goals made 10 times the other 97% put together.
Mm-hmm.
So if you write it down and are clear on how to get there, whether the study is true or not, I actually believe it to be true because, I can't believe something to be true that's not true. But in my own life, when I've been really direct with my goals, really specific, they happen so much quicker than I could ever imagine, versus just kind of wandering through life and letting the stream take you where you're going. What do you guys think?
I'm writing this down right now. I need to lose 30 pounds.
Oh, you're going to go from fun size to where did Antonio go?
No, but so true, my friend. I don't know what it is about when you create it. I think when you create something, whether you say it out loud, where you say it to somebody or you write it down, the more real you make it, the more, I don't know how it works, but you create that reality somehow when you get it out of your head. If you get it out of just being a thought, but you create it, you speak it, you write it, it seems to come a reality when you do that.
Jim Carrey wrote himself $1 million check.
That's right.
Yeah.
He was a very struggling comic.
It's actually 10 million. It was actually 10 million.
Oh, 10 million.
Yeah.
That's amazing. But that's an actual written down thing, right?
Yeah.
And he worked it and made it. It's just.
And then 10 years later, he made his 10 million for real.
That's $1 million a year. I'll take that.
Yeah. No, he made like 10 years later, he got paid. It might have even been 20 million because he was the first guy. No, it was 10 million because it was for The Mask that he got $10 million for the movie The Mask. And that was 10 years after he was living broke with his family. His dad was a janitor and they were living out of a van and having to all do janitorial work. He had to drop out of high school, and he wrote down, I'm a check to himself. In 10 years, I'm going to make $10 million. He wrote it out, and 10 years later, he signed the check for that amount on the mask.
That is great. That is great.
Yeah.
What did you guys make New Year's resolutions this year?
No, for that reason, man. I think for some reason, when you make your New Year resolutions, you break them. I recommend, what I've realized, the ones that I make when they're not year resolutions, if I make a resolution before or after, those are the ones that I really stick to for some reason. I don't know what it is about the New Year ones that are so difficult to stick to, because if there's a resolution, you do it now, man. You don't wait. You just do it at that moment when you need to do it.
Yeah, I hear you on that. I feel the old me had so many pots on the stove that if I add one more to it, it's probably going to get washed under. So now I try and keep 3 pots on the stove that I'm working on, so that I can give each good attention, and much more happens when I have more directed energy at specific pots. Does that make sense? Because I am a total goal setter, and I do hit most of my goals. When I say something, I go after it usually. So, Carl, what about you, brother?
I mean, for me, I think that our show is an example of this principle, because we had the radio show for 2 years in Los Angeles as First Man Up and then Dream Up LA. And then we stopped doing the show. And then this past summer, a coworker at my job said, well, I make funny announcements over a loudspeaker at Walmart. And they said, why don't you do radio? And I was like, I don't know how to do that. And they were like, you're in Little Rock. You did it in LA. Quit worrying about how am I going to do this, and figure it out. And so I remembered KBF being a great home for all sorts of people that dream of having a radio show, contacted them, and now here we are interviewing Mike Huckabee on our 18th episode, and all these other stars we've had. And now KBF has syndicated us to 5 other cities around the country, like Dallas and New Orleans. I mean, it was just quit thinking about why you can't do something and map out how you can.
That's good. That's good. And it's also interesting on your talk about the show that each one of us has different talents and skills, and any one of us individually might not have pulled off the number of guests the great guests we've had, all the different things. So each one of us adds something a little bit different to each thing, and so there's maybe the group is more powerful than the individual. The whole is bigger than the sum of the parts.
Sure. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, no, when people come together, when things come together, they're more than just the sum of their parts. You create something new, and that couldn't be created individually. You're right, Ron.
It's so fascinating, because when we did the show in Los Angeles, I had never met you before, Antonio, and we knew each other through Carl, and honestly, the connection was pretty amazing, and it's just great to be open to new projects and pushing forward and growing. So it's I never would have put the 3 of us in the same. You go, hey, Antonio and Carl and Ron. People go, what?
Yeah.
It literally is a journalist, a comedian, and a lawyer. 3 guys who really don't have that much in common, and yet our show is about everything that we do have in common, which is strikingly quite a bit. So I love it. I love it.
Yeah. Well, hey, folks, we're very excited, as I mentioned, to have an amazing guest this week. And so now let's bring him out. And now our guest, he's been a 2-time Republican candidate for president and is the former governor of Arkansas, but he can now be seen weekly as the host of the fantastic talk show Huckabee on the Trinity Broadcasting Network. Ladies and gentlemen, Mike Huckabee.
Yeah.
Welcome, Mike.
Hi, thank you very much. The 3 hands clapping, that's about the most applause I've had in many years. So thank you very much.
I kind of
Yes,
doubt that, Mike. I kind of doubt that. I was on your talk show as a guest a year and a half ago, and what a great show that is. There were many more people clapping for that, and now it's great to turn the tables, and now we're interviewing you. How does that feel?
It feels good. I don't have to worry about coming up with great questions. And we loved having you on the show, Ron. It was terrific. You're an amazing talent, and we hope to get you back sometime.
I
By the way,
appreciate it.
Mike, Ron's a stand-up comedian, so he's used to the three applause as well.
Oh, geez. That is great. Mike, you've done so many things in your career. What does it feel to have the label? I mean, you've been labeled preacher, you've been labeled governor, you've been labeled candidate for president. Now you're labeled talk show host. Does that fit in your narrative of what you thought you were going to be growing up?
Yeah, the way you describe it, it sounds like I never could find something I was good at, so I kept moving on to something else. In many ways, my life has been a lot of twists and turns. There have been many detours. But when I was a kid, there were two things that I thought I would do. One was politics, and the other was broadcasting. And I started working in radio at the age of 14. My first job, that what I was called a real job, because I did other things when I was a kid, like catching chickens and hauling hay, basically as total slave labor, which if you wanted to buy baseballs or BBs or anything, I came from a family that didn't have much, so it was up to me to figure out how to pay for it. So I did some horrible, unpleasant work to get enough money to do those things. But when I became 14, and then I could get the real kind of job where they would take money out of your check for Social Security and treat you like an employee, I got a job at the local radio station. And that's what I did to pay my way through junior high, high school, college, grad school. And I've had some form of connection to broadcasting really almost unbroken since that time. And in a lot of ways, doing the show on TBN is kind of a full circle. In the middle of that, I pastored churches for about 11 years, which was not on my agenda, unlike what people think. I never thought that would be there. And then I was in politics, you might say, for the past 30 years in one form or another. So it's been an interesting life. I wouldn't trade it for the world. So not everything went my way. I mean, if it had, I would be living at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Obviously, I never did. But life has been better than I ever could have dreamed as a kid growing up in Hope, Arkansas. Just a side note here. I'm the first male in my entire family lineage that ever graduated high school. There's not a single male upstream from me who ever got out of high school. So I mean, my roots are not blue blood. It's not silver spoon in the mouth. None of that. It was basically my ancestry got dumped out of the debtors' prisons of England back in the late 1700s. They came to the shores of Georgia where they were dropped off in the swamps. And everybody was, making do and fending for themselves. And a bunch of them ended up in Arkansas and never had enough money to leave. That's the story.
I think that's why I liked you so much in your story. It's because that's my story too. I'm the first male in my family to graduate from high school as well and go to college. Yeah.
Real quickly, let me just jump in. Just side note, Mike, when I was on your show, as a comedian and a juggler, which is not really the top of the barrel, but you and I had a conversation backstage, and I told you about Antonio. Yeah. And Antonio's story is much like yours. He's from El Salvador, but he ended up being a candidate for Congress. And you went ahead and donated after talking to him, talking to you about his run for Congress a year ago. You donated to him, and this is the connection. And Antonio, take over the story from there.
I just wanted to say that when I ran, I had no idea. I had no intention ever to run in office or politics or anything. But I just saw the state of the country, and I thought to myself, I I can't look at my son in the eye and say that when things were getting bad that I didn't get in the fight. Like, at least, you know, I got in the good fight. Win or lose, I was in the fight. And you know, we got a lot of donors, a lot of grassroots support. Our average donation was $25, but you were one of our most generous donors, and you know, we want to thank you. And yeah, we're grateful for all of it.
Well, Antonio, you're the kind of person I love to help, and I hope that you will do it again, because sometimes, you know, I lost my very first race. It was tough. I wasn't what I expected, but it made me a better candidate. And I sometimes even say, I think the best candidates and those who serve the most effectively are the ones for whom it didn't go smoothly all the way. There were lots of bumps and bruises, and losing a race is not the worst thing. I think winning and never understanding how hard it is to lose, that's the person I don't envy.
No, you're right, because isn't it true to life as well that you need to get bumps along the way so you can learn.
Yeah. And it toughens you up, no doubt about it. Makes you feel a little more determined, because when you get your backside kicked and you get back up, you kind of know what you're made of. If you you know, if you just stay down, then everybody says, yep, that's where he belongs. So I think that's part of the magic of learning how to fight back. And by the way, you know, I'm so glad that you made your journey, became a U.S. citizen, and made this your home and your life. There's so many people who forget that America is a great country because people have come from all over the world with their hopes, their dreams, their aspirations. And it really is the place where dreams come true. And that's why I love this country. And whether a person is born here, like I was, or came here on their own volition, and sometimes, quite frankly, Antonia, I think people who come here on their own, many have even a deeper love for the country than those who take it for granted, and that's unfortunate.
True, but you know, go ahead, Carl.
Oh no, well, I was, go ahead, Mike. I mean, Antonio, it's fine.
No, I was gonna say, you know, but nowadays we're seeing a change in politics. We're seeing a trend where Hispanics used to support the Democratic Party, and right now the trend has turned where majority of Hispanics actually don't support Biden. Actually, whites support Biden more than Hispanics. What do you think that the Republican Party or conservatives can do to win them over to their side? How can they not drop the ball this time and actually get the permanent support?
Well, I've said for many years, and I got a strong support from the Hispanic community in Arkansas when I was governor. I got 48% of the African American vote, which is unheard of for a Republican. Most people say, really? And I say, yeah, and it's not that unusual if you do it right. The biggest thing I say is don't change your message. Don't pretend that you're going to go to the Hispanic community or the African American community and suddenly say, oh, let me throw out some words. You know, that's nonsense. Be authentic. People appreciate authenticity. Yes. The main thing is don't focus on the party. Focus on the principles and the policies. And I always like to say that good politics is not horizontal. It's not left, right, Democrat, Republican, conservative, liberal. Forget the horizontal labels. Focus on the vertical, the up, the down, the good, the bad. Make politics vertical, not horizontal, because sometimes people think that they have to be on this horizontal spectrum. So take them on a vertical spectrum and just ask them, do you want to keep more of the money that you worked hard to earn? Would you like to keep it, or would you like to give more of it to the government so they could spend it for you? And then ask them the question, do you believe that the family is the most basic unit of government that we have in our country? Or should we be governed by those who have been elected, and when we drop our kids off at school, we basically shut up and just let them do whatever they want? How does that work? When we start asking the right questions and we ask people to answer them on their own, they come to the conclusion that whether they ever realized it or not. Most people, I'm convinced, Antonio, who are Hispanic will more naturally fall within a conservative or Republican view. And here's why. They're more pro-life than any ethnic group in the country. They're more pro-family than any ethnic group, including being more toward traditional marriage. They are far more committed to a strong individual work ethic. They're not collectivists. When people come here, they know how hard it was to get here. They don't want to wait until everyone else gets on board the boat before they start enjoying prosperity and the fruits of their labor. They're individualists. And the biggest difference between the left and the right is on this core value and principle of, are you a collectivist or are you an individualist? And I believe America was founded on the notion that our liberties are personal to us. Our liberties do not belong to the group that I'm a part of, whether it's my ethnicity, my gender, my race, none of that. My identity, my freedom, my liberty is unique to me as an individual. And that's what makes America unique. It's what separates us from most governments of the world.
Yes. Yeah, because right now the left is trying to use terms like Latinx and Latinos. 2% of Latinos support those kind of terms. And I think
well, Antonio, you're a Latinx. How do you feel about that term? How do you feel about that term, Mr. El Salvador?
You know, to be honest, any Hispanic or Latino who uses that is exiled.
That's great.
What do you you think the Democrats are lost by using those terms, Latinx, or they're appealing to the wrong kind of Latino?
Oh, I think they are. One of the reasons I'm convinced that they believe in open borders and illegal immigration is because they feel that if people come illegally and the Democrats are the ones who welcome them and sign them up for all kinds of government benefits and programs, including the ability to vote, Democrats feel like, well, they'll be indebted to us forever. But, you know, it's like my daughter, when she got her first job at the age of 14, she went to work at a tennis club, and she was working in the concession stand and the pro shop. And the first time she got a check, she came and said, "Dad, look at this. They ripped me off." And I said, "Do what?" She said, "They ripped me off. Look at this." And she pointed out, and she says, "What is this FICA stuff and all this tax junk? Why are they taking out so much of my pay?" And I just laughed and I said, "Darling, welcome to the Republican Party."
Ain't that the truth?
So Mike, you know, aside from the Latino issues, which are obviously so dynamic right now, you mentioned like you had 48% African American support, and you have a track record all the way back to being a minister who, you know, asked his church in the 80s to welcome Blacks when they had been all white traditionally for ever. And so I find all that really remarkable and admirable. I was wondering, it completely explodes the kind of myth that the left and the media tries to portray conservatives and Republicans as, you know, it's constantly thrown out, "Oh, we're all racist now." You know, they try to throw that word out there all the time. And yet you managed to succeed with your values and your party and completely upended that kind of image. So how do you feel about what the media is doing now? And is the answer that you gave Antonio the same answer you would give the Republican Party now to break past those limiting stereotypes?
100%, Carl. I think, again, the big mistake Republicans have made is somehow almost being afraid to tell their message and their principles. I've often said, if politics could be put into the old Pepsi challenge format, where you take a whole list of beliefs and principles, you took the labels off, and you just went down the row. and you said, which one best identifies what you believe? And you went down through, most people would identify with, well, I think the government ought to be smaller and not running so much of my life. I think it shouldn't take so much of my money away that I've gone out there and earned. I think government should let me choose the schools for my children. I think government, ought to create opportunity, but not dictate what kind of job I'm going to have and how much I'm going to make. And just go through the whole list and say, okay, which one best identifies? And then peel the labels back and say, kind of like I did before with my daughter, welcome to the Republican Party.
Sure.
I want to say this. I do believe that when we're talking to any individual, the ethnicity is so secondary. Really, we focus on the individual as a human being. When people talk about racism, they act like that somehow we're more racist now than we ever were. That is such nonsense. And I often have tried to say to people, the solution to real racism, and there is some, but the real solution is spiritual. If I relate to God, I can't relate to someone looking at them as inferior because God made them equal to me. He loves them no less, and he loves me no more. So therefore, I can't look at somebody and say, I just don't think you're as good as me. I don't think you're as important as me. Because for me to do that, that's an insult to the Creator who made them every bit equal to me. So it's really, I'd say, more spiritual than political. And I wish Republicans would unabashedly just push back hard on this stupid stuff that's being thrown at us about systemic racism and everybody's a racist. And if you're a person of color, you're an automatic victim. That's just not true. There are people who have achieved great things, who have overcome whatever victimhood some would give them. My friend Ben Carson is a great example of a kid who grew up poor. His mother cleaned houses for a living. He becomes the most celebrated pediatric neurosurgeon in the history of the world. How did he do that? I thought he was supposed to be the victim of systemic racism, and he couldn't possibly end up being who he was and is. So how did that happen? Well, it happened because he was told by his mother that he was as good as any other kid in the school. He just have to work a little harder. How did I end up where I am? I was not the kid who lived in the nice house and got to go on vacations and had air conditioning, and my family never had a new car and all those sort of things. I could sit around and whine about it and say, gee, life isn't fair. Or I could get off my rear end and maybe work a lot harder than kids that had stuff handed to them. Best thing that ever happened to me, because I learned how to work hard. I learned how to multitask before anyone knew there was a term for that. And, I will just put it this way. I've lived a life phenomenally better than I ever dreamed was possible when I was a little kid growing up in that orange brick shotgun rent house on 2nd Street in Hope, Arkansas.
Amen to that. Amen to that. And, so you're talking about principles and character, promoting that through political terms. But when, as a kid, you said, I wanted to be in broadcasting and I wanted to be serve in politics. You've done both of those. How did faith come into your life, and how did that change your trajectory?
My mother took me to Sunday school when I was a kid. It was sort of like the thing to do for a small town in the South. Your parents wanted you to be sort of steeped in the idea that there is a God and God consciousness, and that was very much a part of my upbringing. At age 10, I went to a vacation Bible school, and that's where I was introduced in a personal relationship to Jesus Christ. And it was, quite frankly, not what I intended to experience that day, because my sister had gone to Bible school the day before. She said, you need to go to Bible school. I said, nah, it's for sissies. I'm not going to Bible school. And she said, well, you really ought to go, because they play baseball during the breaks and you get all the cookies you can eat and all the Kool-Aid you can drink. And suddenly I thought, I think I'll go to Bible school. Baseball, cookies, Kool-Aid. Yeah, I'm in. So I went the next day. Of course, I found out they didn't think I could eat more than 2 cookies or drink more than 1 cup of Kool-Aid to begin with. But that was the day that the pastor of that church came and talked to us about what it meant to personally know Jesus. And the more he talked, I didn't understand everything it meant, but I knew that had never happened to me. And so he said, if you'd like to pray and receive Jesus, lift your hand. Well, I was a shy kid. Believe this or not, I was incredibly bashful. I wasn't about to lift my hand. I thought maybe he'd point me out, make fun of me, or everybody come beat me up or something. So I just prayed the prayer without lifting my hand. And I found out you don't have to physically lift your hand if you lift your heart. And that's when I came to know Christ. I will say that what really changed my life, though, more dramatically, was the impact of the Jesus movement in the late 60s and to some degree in the early 70s. That was, for me, what was transformative, because I grew up in a small town with very, what I would call rather old-fashioned churches. And the whole message was, get saved, go to church, go to heaven. That was about it. And it was like, hold on for dear life. And maybe, you know, when you die, you'll go to heaven and there's not much here. And that seemed so very empty. And when the Jesus movement really started taking hold, and it moved from California across the rest of the country, it even got to places like Arkansas. And so there were many of us young teenagers who in the 60s began to realize that there's more to this. And I will credit Bill Bright from Campus Crusade. His organization, more than any other, really introduced me to what it was to live a Christian life, understand what that meant on a dynamic level. And then the culmination was going to Expo 72 in Dallas, Texas. The best way to describe that is it was Woodstock for Christians. 250,000 young Christians from all over the world gathered in Dallas.
No pot, just no pot.
Yeah, you know, we were just happy on Jesus. It was quite a different experience. Billy Graham spoke, and there, you know, it was amazing. Johnny Cash sang, and there were a lot of, you know, Christian rock artists before anyone knew what Christian rock was. Larry Norman, Love Song, all of these bands that played the music that I could relate to, but they did it with Christian lyrics. And that was just mind blowing to me, because, you know, when you're a teenager and you're listening to the Beatles and the Stones and Creedence and the Who, the last thing you really want to hear is all 4 verses of Just As I Am, you know, and I'm not trying to belittle the old hymns. I love the old hymns. But when you're a teenager, as Larry Norman so beautifully said in his song, why should the devil have all the good music? So.
And Mike, was the Christian movement in the 60s a result of the chaos of the 60s? And if so, you see some parallels now with so much of the chaos we see now? And do you see some sort of spiritual change happening soon or coming?
I see the preparation for it. I see the emptiness, that sense of isolation that so many people have. I think COVID has accelerated that. I want to believe that we are on the verge of maybe that emptiness fizzing out and people saying, what else is there? And that would be the genesis of a real spiritual renewal. I'm not seeing it yet, but I think the stage is set. And what we're looking for, what we pray for, is a spark, something that will ignite this. And it probably will be something that will happen organically. It'll happen not because somebody famous or influential, and certainly not somebody who's running a big organization will lead it. It will happen because as people realize how empty a life of selfishness is, they will say, what else is there? And into that, when the gospel is genuinely, not cosmetically, but genuinely and authentically introduced, it is life-changing. And that's when I go back to what was going on in the 60s. There was such emptiness. 68 to me was the bellwether year. That was the year Martin Luther King was assassinated, Robert Kennedy was assassinated, Vietnam was in full bore. Lyndon Johnson said, I'm not going to run for the White House because everybody blamed him for Vietnam. The country was a mess. Cities were being burned to the ground. It made what happened last year honestly look like what CNN called it, a peaceful protest. It was some rough times, and people were, they were fighting in the streets. It was brutal. And it was in that environment that people said, there's got to be a better way to live than this. And that's when really the counterculture met the counterculture. Because the counterculture was the hippies, the yippies. And into that, many of those very people, when they became believers, it was transformative. And their testimonies, their stories, and their zeal was really what created the Jesus movement and a dramatic change, I think, in the culture of the country.
Well, you're certainly, Kanye West has really made a pivot there, and it's someone that was to be the last guy I would expect to have that kind of a turn, and so much so my daughter flies her and her friend all the way to Atlanta to go see his concert, and
wow.
Just I've watched him change, and when you see someone change that dramatically, he seems to be Lord seems to really have touched his heart. It's really a beautiful thing. I'll start crying right now.
Yeah.
It's
I
so
agree.
powerful.
And I think it's exactly the guy like Kanye that is the least likely, the person that no one would see coming, walking up to the pulpit with a Bible, and it's like, really? And of course, the cynics and the naysayers have been brutal to him. But from the very beginning, when I heard that he was really having a spiritual transformation, I just was excited and thought, Lord, protect him from the vultures, protect him from the bloodsuckers who will come after him, either to discourage him or to manipulate him and use him, and let him find you so that you can use him for your own purposes and not get caught up. Because that happens a lot, where a young believer sort of gets kidnapped by either commercial interests, which is tragic, or selfish people who want to use them for their own glory and pathway to fame. And basically, I think you need to step back and love him, pray for him, but let God work through him. But what a powerful witness he is. And I think those are the kind of things that, as we begin to see, I think there will be, as Antonio asked, that parallel into what happened in the 60s.
That's great. I have two comments on that. One, just that when I hear him speak, he speaks with a wisdom, the believing Kanye. He speaks with a wisdom that's way beyond someone who just became a believer recently. It's quite fascinating to listen to some of him talk. So I do pray that God protects him. And that being said, do you have a life verse that has affected you in your life? Because our show is Dream Up. We focus on principles that make our lives better. Is there a life verse that you've latched onto?
Without a doubt. It's a verse that I embraced when I was 15. Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me.
That's mine.
Is that yours?
Yeah.
Well, for me, it was, again, going back to a background where I didn't feel that I was equal to other kids in my community. I just, I wasn't as good as they were. They had more stuff. Their parents maybe had better education than mine. They had nicer homes, nicer clothes, everything. And if you just compared me to them, I'm thinking, I'm inferior. I don't belong even hanging out with these guys. And that verse was life-changing to me, because as that message became deeply personal, I realized that what I was being limited by was not circumstances. It was my own spirit of resignation to what was rather than to what God wanted to be. And that was the beginning for me to see my life really turn. And the idea that I can do all things through Christ. And the key there is not because the whole motivation world is you can do everything. No, you really can't. I will never quarterback the Dallas Cowboys to a Super Bowl. Okay. I can dream up for that, but it ain't going to happen. And by the way, lately, I don't think anybody else is either, but at least for me, that is not going to happen because I'm not a great athlete. So, this idea that I can do anything, that's half the story. The other half is I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So what I got to find out is, what is it that God is strengthening me for? I can do that. I can't do everything, but I can do things, even the things that seem impossible for me, I can do them if those are the plans that God's made, because he will empower those capacities to take root when he's ready for it. That's the beauty. It's just, when people say, how do I find God's will? And I'll say, quit looking for yours and be open to what he wants to do and quit fighting him. People act like God's will is a secret that he's trying to keep from you. He has every reason to want to reveal it. The only reason he may not have revealed it is because he knows we're not ready to say yes. So put your vehicle in neutral, quit trying to drive, and for heaven's sakes, don't put it in reverse, and say, Lord, I'm in neutral. Push me where you want to go, and you'll be amazed at where he will take you.
I love that. So we're really hitting on the spiritual journey of life. But a lot of people in the church that I've grown up with, some believe it's your duty to serve and get involved in politics. And other people say God doesn't care about politics. He's not concerned with patriotism. He's only concerned with saving souls. You've been a preacher and a politician. How do you reconcile that? And what's your angle on that?
Ron, it's pretty simple for me. Everybody wants to eat from a clean plate. If you go to the restaurant and they bring your food and it's got your dinner on it, but lunch residue is still there, you're going to say, no, I want a clean plate. So I tell people, everybody wants a clean plate, but that means somebody's got to do dishes. So when I hear people complain about our culture, our world, the politicians and what they're doing to us, my first response is roll up your sleeves, get your arms in the dishwater all the way to the elbow and scrub hard. And if you're not willing to do that, quit complaining, because you're part of the problem. You allow what is happening by your silence. And when people say, I don't want to get involved in politics, my response is, pal, you are already involved in politics. You may not think of it, but every time your kid comes home from school and they're being taught that America is an evil country and that all people of a certain race are evil and they ought to apologize and be sorry for something they had nothing to do with, I said, you're involved. You're involved because if you sit back and say, yeah, that's okay for my kids to hear that, well, you're involved. You're just not involved in anything positive. If you, for me, life and this issue of sanctity of life is very, very sacred to me. I just believe it's a civilization issue, not a political one. So if I look at the fact that there are people who believe that right up until the moment of birth, a person can end the life of a perfectly innocent child, and I say that's wrong, that's immoral, but I do nothing to help stem that tide by electing people who are pro-life and by pushing for pro-life policies, then I don't really believe it. And so this idea of I'm not involved, I don't want to be involved, quit kidding yourself. We're all involved. It's just a matter of to what degree. I would also say this, Ron, I don't think everybody ought to run for office. It's probably not wise because it's a brutal game. Antonio, I'm sure, would affirm that it's a full contact sport played without pads. And when people tell me they want to run for something, I always say, if you can't stand the sight of your own blood, don't do it, because you're going to see plenty of it. You're going to get hurt. This is smash mouth football, but you don't get all the benefit of the equipment. It's tough, but if some of us don't play the game, some of us don't suit up and get in the arena, then we have surrendered to the people that we feel like are doing, excuse me, the most damage to the country and to the world. So yeah, we need to be involved. We need to be informed voters, thoughtful voters, donors. And when people say, well, I'm just a Christian, I only care about spiritual things. Okay, buckle up and accept whatever is thrown at you, because that's what you deserve. And I just find that's crazy unacceptable.
Hey, Mike, we only have a few minutes left. I wanted to ask you, since you have such a fantastic perspective, I'm sure. What do you feel? Do you see anybody as the likely front runner for the Republicans at 24? Do you think it'll be Trump, or do you think somebody else will step in and take that mantle?
Carl, it's hard to say. I think if Trump decides to run, and I don't know whether he will or not, but I think if he does, anyone would have a hard time overcoming him for the nomination. I just think that would be very unlikely. And I have no idea what he will do. There's a side of me that kind of thinks, gee, his great play would be to be the king maker rather than try to be the king. He could put his hand upon someone and kind of anoint them like what happened with King David and say, this is the guy, and it's over. And is that Mike Pompeo, Ron DeSantis? Who is that person? I don't know. I think that if Trump doesn't run, there'll be 20 people or more that will all at least get their toes in the water and see if they got a shot. It'll be a free-for-all. And I just hope that what will happen is that the party will be very focused on really what we're up against. We're not up against each other. And people said to me, gosh, in 2016, you never took a shot at Trump. You never took a shot at any of the other candidates. How come? I said, because they're on my team. And one of us, we're all vying to be quarterback. Only one of us are going to be quarterback, but the rest of us have a support role to play if we don't get picked to be the quarterback. And I think it's the dumbest thing in the world when candidates within their own team say, that guy's not qualified, he's not fit, he shouldn't be elected. Because then one of two things happen. He gets the nomination and you have to go support him. Or he gets the nomination and you don't support him. And either way, you really are hurting your own cause. So if Republicans have the free-for-all that we may have, I hope people will focus upon our contrast with the far left and not our very minor contrast with each other, because the bigger things are at play in this election.
And what advice are you giving Sarah as a father and as a former governor in her race for governor? I assume you must be, she must be turning to you for a good deal of it, I would imagine.
Well, Carl, she's named me a senior advisor to her campaign, but let me explain what that means. I'm a senior citizen and I'm babysitting her children a lot, and I advise them when they have to go to bed. So that's my biggest role in the whole process. She certainly is, asking me things mainly about specifics in state government and policy, and we're having talks about that. But she's her own person, and there's no doubt in my mind that she will be a terrific governor. I'm very proud of her. But the biggest piece of advice I give her is be who you are. Don't let people steer you into a direction that deep in your heart you know is not what you believe and where you want to go. Stick to your stuff. And I've tried to say to her so many times, focus on good policy, because good policy is the best politics. Don't focus as much on the mechanics of the political game. Focus a whole lot more on the principles of great policy that lift people up, whether they're at the bottom of life or that protect people who have achieved something, so that government doesn't rob them of what they have worked for. It works beautifully at both ends of the economic spectrum, and be true to that. And you won't have to apologize if you do.
You know, you said something really profound, Mike, because when I was younger, I did feel very inadequate. I felt like I didn't belong. I felt like I had no power, no strength. And when you feel like that, you try to hide in the group because you think you'll find strength in the group.
Yeah.
And that's why you think as a collectivist, when you feel weak, I think it's only when you start feeling stronger and that you can stand on your own 2 feet that you start realizing the power of the individual. And that's how my transformation came about. I was wondering how do you think we let people, how do we make people stronger? How do we let them know that they can stand on their own 2 feet?
What beautifully said, Antonio. And I think what you just said and the manner in which you said it is so very important. It's easy for us to hide in the group. And truth is, one of the reasons people like to be collectivists, they bear no responsibility for the outcome of anything. If I'm just sort of back in the crowd, I can always say that it was someone else's fault. But the moment I step to the front of the band and I take the baton and I say, okay, this is the beat that we're going to march to. Follow my beat and let's play the song. Now, if it goes off into a train wreck, it's all on me. And a lot of people just don't want that responsibility. But America made a great country because people were willing to take tremendous risk. But with great risk come great rewards. And we just need to remind every young American that they'll never see a great reward without taking great risk. And they've got to be willing to be different, follow their dreams. The reason we have such innovations from people like Steve Jobs or Steven Spielberg, I mean, these people were misfits. People forget they were nerds. Steven Spielberg was given a little home movie camera by his parents when he was 8 years old, and all his classmates thought he was a weird, nerdy kid. I don't think they think of him now like that. Steve Jobs he was a misfit from the get-go, and he botched his education, as did Bill Gates. You look at all these people who have created something that's changed the world, and most of them did not fit in, and they were not part of a herd. And they heard things others didn't hear. They saw things others didn't see. Someone I have great admiration for, I've never met him, I'd love to, is Elon Musk. I just love it that he's such an individualist. He just doesn't care if people don't like him or if they disagree with him. It's like, okay, I'm the richest guy in the world. So who cares what you think? It's like, I love that about him. I do. And it's not because he's rich. It's because he's followed his dreams. He's created things that are amazing. And frankly, I don't think he's overwhelmed by how much money he has. I think he's driven by his creativity.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that is such a beautiful answer. It really fits what our show is about. And you dreamed up your life. You went through preaching. You became the governor of Arkansas. Did you ever once think of changing the policies to make anyone who entered your office just have to speak the first line in a British accent and say, "Hello, governor"?
It's one of my favorite things when people will do that, because I know that they've at least watched some British comedy, which I still believe is some of the best comedy ever created, because the British have such a panache for making things funny that otherwise wouldn't be. And I just think their humor is typically sophisticated, always right on the edge of being a little bit naughty. But for the most part, they are funny without being outrageously vulgar. And a lot of American comics, I think, are not funny. So they've substituted vulgarity for it because they can't be creative enough other than just to try to make you laugh by making you so uncomfortable that your maybe intuitive reaction is to laugh because you don't know what else to do. It's so outrageous. I don't look at that as great comedy. I look at the things that make my brain think about what was just said and realize whether it's a double entendre or it's some kind of sight gag, but it genuinely had to come from the mind of the creative. That's what's really funny to me.
As a clean comic and someone who's worked clean my entire career for 40 years as a comic, I appreciate your platform on Huckabee and that you use it to actually promote other acts like myself. And I appreciate you having me on the show.
Well, as I said before, Ron, I hope to have you back. I think we need more comedy, more, and frankly, more of entertainment and more variety of it. Everything ought not to be just an actor talking about his movie. That's fine. But we made this show, the Huckabee Show on TBN, to be different and to be somewhat, to be honest, a throwback to the days when there was variety shows on television, but they were wholesome and clean and the whole family could watch. And you didn't have to rush the little kids out of the room because somebody was on going blue. I just think there needs to be that kind of refreshing variety show that calms people down, because I see people that all they do is watch cable news. Look, I work in cable news. I appreciate it. But when people tell me they watch cable news 24/7, I know I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this, but I tell them, don't do that. Don't. You need more of a life. Listen to music, walk your dog, go hunting or fishing, spend some time in the outdoors, read a book, but for gosh sake, don't sit around and watch cable news 24/7 because it will make you crazy, and it really will.
Well, hey, Mike, we want to say thanks for coming on and giving us so much of your time and insights. And it's been a real honor to have you.
Thank you. Great to be with you. Happy New Year to all of you. And I pray that 2022 will be markedly better than the previous 2 years have been.
Yeah.
Yep.
Amen
Happy
to
New
that.
Year, Mike.
All right.
Thank you so much.
You bet.
Hey, thank you.